There was a time in Britain when a man came home from a 12-hour shift, took off his flat cap, sat down at a scrubbed wooden table, and ate a supper built to put the fuel back into a body that had spent all day breaking rocks, forging steel, or pulling coal from a seam half a mile underground. Not a sandwich, not a salad. A proper working man's tea, made from the cheapest cuts the butcher had left, the toughest scraps from the joint, and hours of patient simmering on the range. Number 16 on this list could feed a family of 6 on what a packet of crisps costs you today. Number 4 was so beloved in mill towns that arguments broke out over the burnt bits. And number 1 vanished the day Tesco opened its doors in the village. Let's count down 25 British working man's suppers no one makes anymore. Number 25. Bread and beef dripping with raw onion was the most honest supper in Britain, eaten by miners, dockers and steel workers when there was nothing else in the pantry but the jar on the back of the range. Mothers spread cold beef dripping thick on doorstep slices of farmhouse bread, the dark jelly at the bottom of the jar prized above the fat itself for its deep, savory richness. A scrape of dripping cost nothing. The bread cost 2pence, and a slice of raw onion, sharp enough to make the eyes water, finished the plate. By 1953, the National Food Survey recorded that nearly 4 loaves a week left every working-class kitchen, and a generation of children grew up convinced that the brown jelly was the finest thing a butcher ever made. Fathers ate it standing at the counter, still in their work boots, the salt and fat hitting the tongue like memory. Number 24. Spam fritters with chips anchored the working man's Friday tea long after rationing officially ended in 1954. Housewives sliced the pink loaf thick, dipped each slab in a batter of flour, egg, and a splash of milk, then fried them in beef dripping until the edges turned crisp and golden. Served with a mountain of chips, a slosh of malt vinegar, and a smear of HP brown sauce, Spam fritters cost less than £1 to feed 4 men. By 1955, Britain still imported 100,000 tins of luncheon meat from America each year, and every working-class pantry kept at least 1 tin in reserve. Children loved them. Mothers blessed them for stretching the week. Fathers, coming home from a shift at the rolling mill, never once complained about pink meat in batter. Today, Spam fritters survive only in greasy spoon cafes that refuse to die. Number 23. Pickled eggs and chips was the supper of single working men in lodgings across the north, a meal so frugal it required almost no cooking at all. The landlady kept a big glass jar on the kitchen counter, eggs hard-boiled and submerged in malt vinegar, spiked with peppercorns and bay leaves, ready for weeks at a time. A pickled egg cost 2p. A bag of chips wrapped in newspaper cost 4p. Together they made the cheapest hot meal in Britain. Men crushed the rubbery eggs into the chips with the back of a fork, letting the sharp vinegar soak the salt and grease, then ate the lot straight from the paper with their fingers. The smell of vinegar and frying lard rolled through every back kitchen on a Friday night. When pre-packaged everything arrived in the 1980s, the great glass jar disappeared from the counter, and a quiet ritual of bachelor life ended with it. Number 22. Cheese and onion pie carried the working man through Wednesday tea when wages were still days away, and meat was a memory. Housewives lined a battered pie dish with short crust pastry, filled it with grated Cheshire or Lancashire cheese, thick slices of raw onion, and a splash of milk to bind, then baked the lot until the top blistered golden. The smell of melting cheese and sweet onion drifted out of terrace kitchens from Bolton to Burnley. By 1957, cheese still cost less than half the price of bacon, and a generous PIE fed 5 men for under 1 and 6. Fathers cut wedges thick as a doorstep, eating them with a spoonful of piccalilli and a glass of stout. The crust crumbled. The cheese ran. The onion bit back. Today the dish has been swallowed by chilled supermarket quiche, but no factory pie ever matched the pull of a homemade onion pie steaming on a winter night. Number 21. Sausage and mash with onion gravy was the Tuesday tea that every working-class wife could turn out in her sleep. The sausages came from the butcher on the corner, fat with rusk and pepper, sold at sixpence for a string of 8. The mash was made with real potatoes, peeled by hand and crushed with a knob of margarine and a splash of warm milk. But the magic was in the gravy. Slow-cooked onions browned in beef dripping until they turned dark as treacle, thickened with flour and a crumbled OXO cube. By 1960, sausage and mash appeared on tables across Britain at least once a week, the cheapest hot meal a butcher could supply. Fathers mashed everything together into one savory mound, the onion gravy soaking every forkful. Frozen ready meals took the dish, stripped the dripping, and turned it into something pale and apologetic. The real version, dark and rich and patient, has all but vanished. Number 20. Bubble and squeak with bacon and HP brown sauce. Bubble and squeak became the proper Monday night supper when the Sunday roast had been picked clean and only the vegetables remained. Mothers chopped the leftover cabbage, mashed the cold potatoes, and tipped the lot into a hot pan glistening with bacon fat. The mixture hissed and squeaked as it caught the bottom, throwing up a crust dark as toffee. 2 thick rashers of streaky bacon fried beside it, the fat rendered slow until the meat curled at the edges. Served on a warm plate with a generous squirt of HP brown sauce, this was the meal that turned scraps into a feast. Diaries from the era record the ritual. Bill complained about cabbage again, but the plate came back empty. By 1962, every working-class home ate some version of bubble and squeak on a Monday, and not a single scrap from Sunday found its way into the bin. Pork dripping cake on toast sounds like an invention, but in mining communities across South Yorkshire, it was the breakfast and supper of choice for men working 12-hour shifts underground. The cake itself was nothing more than rendered pork fat, set in a small dish with a layer of dark, salty jelly at the bottom. Mothers cut thick slices off a brown loaf, toasted them on the open fire, then smeared the dripping cake across the hot bread until it melted into the crumb. A pinch of black pepper, a scrape of mustard. That was tea. By 1955, pork dripping cost half the price of butter and contained twice the calories, which was exactly the point. A miner needed fuel, not flavor. The cake came from the Sunday belly pork roast, every drop saved and pressed into the dish on the cold pantry shelf. When margarine took over in the 1970s, the dripping cake disappeared from grocers' counters within a decade. Number 18. Liver and bacon with mash and onion gravy was the Wednesday tea that fathers either loved or loathed, but mothers served it anyway because the iron in the liver was good for the blood. Lamb's liver, sliced thin and dusted in seasoned flour, hit the hot pan for less than a minute on each side, just enough to keep it tender and pink in the middle. 2 rashers of bacon fried alongside, the fat seasoning the pan. Onions browned slow and dark, thickened into a deep gravy. Served over mashed potatoes on a chipped white plate, this was the supper that built generations of dockers. By 1958, a pound of lamb's liver cost less than 9pence, making it the cheapest meat in the butcher's window. Children pulled faces at the smell. Fathers, coming in from a cold shift, devoured the lot and asked for the bread to mop the gravy. Cooked too long, the liver turned bitter. Cooked right, it was a king's tea. Number 17. Faggots and mushy peas ruled the black country tables for over a century, a working man's supper so rich it could anchor a man through a double shift at the foundry. Pattern break. Here is where things get interesting. Butchers in Dudley and Wolverhampton mixed pig's liver, heart, lights, and belly fat with breadcrumbs, onion, and sage, shaped the mixture into balls the size of a fist, wrapped each one in cawl fat, and baked them in deep trays of dark onion gravy. The smell could clear a street. A pair of faggots cost 9pence in 1956, served with a great mound of mushy peas made from dried marrow fats soaked overnight with a pinch of bicarbonate of soda. Men ate 4 at a sitting. The gravy soaked everything. Fish and chip shops across the Midlands sold faggots straight from the warming counter, wrapped in paper, eaten on the walk home. When independent butchers closed in the 1980s, the recipe died with them. Factory faggots are not the same, not even close. Brown Windsor soup carried the strange reputation of being the most hated soup in Britain, yet it appeared on working men's tables and railway dining car menus for over 50 years. Housewives browned cheap cuts of beef and lamb together, simmered them with onion, carrot, barley, and a splash of Madeira. If the budget stretched, then strained the lot into a thick, dark, almost gravy-like broth. A bowl, served with chunks of bread, could fuel a man through an afternoon at the dock. By 1955, Brown Windsor appeared on the menu of nearly every British rail buffet car, the smell drifting through smoky carriages on the line to Crewe. Critics later mocked it as the embodiment of dreary post-war food. But ask any working man who ate it in the back kitchen on a cold November tea, and he would tell you it tasted of strength itself. When Heinz tomato soup took over the nation in the 1970s, Brown Windsor vanished from the table almost overnight. Number 15. Pig's trotters in vinegar were the Saturday night supper of choice for working men in pubs across the East End and the industrial north. The landlord kept a great enamel pot behind the bar, trotters boiled until tender with onion and bay, then served cold on a chipped plate with a splash of malt vinegar and a hunk of bread. A pair cost 4pence. The meat fell from the bone in salty, gelatinous shreds, and the men ate them with their fingers between pints of mild. By 1954, trotters appeared on the menu of nearly every working-class pub in Manchester, Liverpool, and Glasgow, the cheapest hot snack a publican could legally serve. Some men preferred them hot with mustard. Others swore by them cold, the jelly setting on the plate like a savory aspic. When pub kitchens modernized in the 1970s and packets of crisps replaced proper bar snacks, the trotter pot disappeared from the back counter. A small, sticky, deeply British ritual ended without anyone noticing. Number 14. Lobscouse, or just plain Scouse, gave Liverpool its nickname and fueled the dockers who built the British Empire. The dish came from Scandinavian sailors and settled in Merseyside in the 18th century. A thick, brown stew of cheap mutton, onions, carrots, and potatoes simmered for hours until the meat collapsed and the potatoes turned half to mash. Variations multiplied across the streets of Toxteth and Bootle. There was blind scouse for families who could not afford meat that week. There was scouse with corned beef when the docks were short. Served with red cabbage pickled sharp and a hunk of crusty bread, scouse cost less than 1 shilling to feed a family of 7. Mothers kept the pot on the range all day, topping it up with whatever scraps the larder allowed. The smell defined Liverpool tea time. When ready meals arrived in the 1980s, Scouse retreated to a handful of pubs and homes that refused to forget. But the everyday ritual is gone. Number 13. Stoveies stood as the Scottish working man's answer to the question of what to do with leftover Sunday roast. Housewives layered cold sliced beef or lamb with thick rounds of potato and onion in a heavy iron pot, added a ladle of gravy or beef stock, and cooked the lot slowly on the stove until the potatoes broke down into a creamy mass and the meat soaked through every layer. Some cooks added a knob of dripping for richness. Others swore by a splash of brown sauce. Either way, by 1958, Stoveies appeared on tables across Scotland, from Glasgow tenements to Aberdeen fishing cottages, served with a glass of cold milk and an oatcake on the side. Men coming home from the shipyards or the trawlers ate 3 platefuls without breathing. The dish had no fixed recipe. Every grandmother claimed hers was right. Today, Stoveies survive in the odd pub and football ground, but the everyday tea is fading fast. Number 12. Bacon ribs and peas pudding anchored the working man's Saturday tea across the northeast, a dish so beloved on Tyneside that peas pudding became as much a part of the regional identity as the Tyne Bridge. Pattern break. Controversy incoming. Housewives bought bacon ribs from the butcher for 4p a pound, simmered them with bay and pepper for 3 hours, then used the salty cooking liquor to boil dried yellow split peas into a thick, golden, buttery pudding. The two were served together on a warm plate with a hunk of stotty cake, the bread split and stuffed with the leftover meat for the next day's dinner. By 1956, peas pudding featured in 9 out of 10 Newcastle homes at least once a week. Children sang the old rhyme, fathers spread the pudding on bread like butter, and the pot on the range never truly emptied. Supermarkets tried to bottle it, but the sealed tubs were a shadow of the real thing. The proper bacon rib supper has all but disappeared. Number 11. Beef shin stew with pearl barley was the meal that turned the toughest cut in the butcher's window into the richest pot of the week. Housewives bought a length of beef shin, marrow bone and all. For 1 and 6 in 1955, browned it slowly in beef dripping, then added onion, carrot, swede, and a generous handful of pearl barley before letting the pot simmer for 4 hours on the back of the range. The barley swelled, the marrow melted into the stock. The meat fell from the bone in dark, glossy strands. By the time tea was served at 5:30, the kitchen smelled of every winter that ever was. Fathers ate 2 bowls, dipping bread to soak the gravy, while children fought over the marrow. The pot lasted 3 nights, deepening in flavor each time it was reheated. Modern butchers no longer sell shin on the bone, and the pearl barley aisle in Tesco gathers dust. A great working supper, quietly extinguished. Cottage pie with proper mince and dripping mash kept the British working class fed for over a century, and the real version, made the way grandmothers made it, has almost completely vanished. Housewives browned 1 pound of cheap beef mince with onions, carrots, and a splash of Worcester sauce, simmered the lot in a thin gravy spiked with an OXO cube, then topped it with a thick layer of mashed potato beaten with beef dripping rather than butter. The pie went under the grill until the peaks of the mash turned dark and crisp. By 1957, cottage pie appeared on tables across Britain at least once a fortnight, costing less than 2 shillings to feed a family of 6. Fathers cracked the crust with a fork, the steam rising in a great savory cloud. The dripping mash made all the difference, dense, rich, almost meaty. Modern recipes use butter or olive oil, and the dish has lost its soul. The real cottage pie is gone. Number 9. Welsh rarebit at supper was not toasted cheese on bread, no matter what supermarkets would have you believe. The proper version was a working man's tea, a thick, glossy mixture of grated, mature cheddar, ale, mustard powder, Worcester sauce, and an egg yolk, melted slowly in a saucepan until it turned the texture of warm custard, then poured over thick slabs of farmhouse bread and grilled until the top blistered dark. A glass of brown ale finished the plate. By 1958, Welsh rarebit appeared on the tables of dockers in Cardiff and Swansea, the proper recipe handed down through chapel cookbooks and pencil-marked margins. The smell of melting cheese and stout filled the back kitchen on a Friday night. Children begged for the burnt bits at the edge. Fathers ate 3 slices and called it tea. Today, the supermarket version, 2 slices of bread with a slab of plastic cheese, would horrify any proper Welsh grandmother. Number 8. Polony and chips was the working man's lunch and supper from Sheffield to Sunderland, a sausage so distinctively British that no other nation ever bothered to copy it. Polony was a smooth, pink, finely ground pork sausage in a bright red, waxy casing, sold by the inch at every butcher's counter for 2p an ounce. Men sliced it thick on a thick slice of buttered bread, or, on a Friday night, took home a 1/4 pound to fry up alongside a great pile of chips and a fried egg. The waxy casing browned in the pan, the meat went soft and savory, and the whole plate was finished with a slosh of malt vinegar and a sprinkle of salt. By 1955, polony appeared in nearly every northern fish and chip shop, sold alongside saveloys and pies. When pre-packed cold meats arrived in the 1980s, polony retreated to a handful of traditional butchers. A great working sausage, quietly forgotten. Number 7. Cow heel pie was the black country specialty that drew miners from every pit in the region to a single bakery in Brierley Hill. The dish was as ancient as it was confronting. Butchers boiled cow's foot for 6 hours until the cartilage and skin dissolved into a thick, gelatinous broth. The shredded meat was packed into a deep pie dish with onion, beef chunks, and a splash of stout, then sealed under a thick, short-crust pastry and baked for an hour. As the pie cooled, the broth set into a savory jelly, holding everything together in glossy, trembling slices. By 1956, cow heel pies were sold by the dozen at black country butchers for 9p each, and miners ate them cold, straight from the paper, between shifts. The smell, rich and almost meaty sweet, was unmistakable. When independent butchers closed in the 1980s, cow heel disappeared from the meat counter entirely. The pie that once fueled the foundries is now a memory. Number 6. Saveloy and peas pudding were the proper London working man's tea, served from pie and mash shops across the East End and South London for over 100 years. Saveloy was the bright red, smoky, finely ground pork sausage. Hung in rows behind the counter, doused in scalding water before being served on a warm enamel plate with a great spoonful of peas pudding, a ladle of parsley liquor, a sauce thickened with flour, and a slosh of malt vinegar. By 1955, dozens of pie and mash shops dotted every working-class neighbourhood, from Walthamstow to Peckham, costing less than 1 shilling for a full plate. Dockers, market porters, and bus conductors stopped in on the way home from a shift. The formica tables were packed elbow to elbow. The smell of vinegar, parsley liquor, and warm saveloy was the smell of London tea. Today only a handful of shops survive, and the proper saveloy supper is a vanishing art. Number 5. Lancashire hot pot with mutton, kidney and oysters was the proper version, not the simplified lamb stew the supermarkets sell today. Pattern break. The original recipe, written in pencil in the margins of Lancashire cookbooks, layered cheap mutton chops with sheep's kidney, onion, and a handful of fresh oysters at the bottom of a tall earthenware pot, then topped the lot with thinly sliced potatoes overlapping like roof tiles. The pot went into the oven for 4 hours, the potatoes crisping into a dark, blistered crust, while the meat below braised in its own juices. Oysters cost a halfpenny each in the 1950s in Lancashire, cheaper than mutton, and they added a deep, briny richness to the gravy. By 1958, every mill town had its own version. The hot pot was the badge of the region, fought over, argued about, claimed by every grandmother as her own. The supermarket version, lamb chops and potatoes, is a faint echo. Number 4. Steak and kidney pudding sat at the top of the working man's table when the wages had come in and the household could afford a proper Friday tea. Housewives lined a deep ceramic basin with suet pastry rolled half an inch thick. They filled the cavity with chunks of stewing steak and ox kidney browned in dripping, splashed in a glass of stout, sealed the top with another round of pastry, and steamed the whole pudding for 4 hours over a pan of bubbling water. The smell of beef, kidney, and rich suet pastry filled the house all afternoon. When the basin was turned out at the table, the pastry split open and a flood of dark, savory gravy poured across the plate. By 1955, a steak and kidney pudding cost 3 shillings to make and fed 7. Fathers fought the crust at the corners. Children claimed the soft middle. Today, the dish survives only in pubs and museums, replaced by sad, chilled pies that bear no resemblance. Number 3. Mince and tatties with dough balls was the Glasgow tenement supper that fed 3 generations of shipyard workers. Pattern break. The proper version started with a pound of cheap mince, browned slowly and dripping with onion and a crumbled oxo, simmered in a thin brown gravy with a splash of brown sauce, and finished with great soft dough balls made from flour, suet, and a pinch of salt, dropped in to plump and steam in the last 20 minutes. Served over a mound of fluffy mashed potatoes on a chipped white plate, the dish cost less than 1 shilling and 4pence to feed a family of 6. Fathers came in from the Clyde, hands black with grease, and ate 3 plates without speaking. The mince was thin, the tatties thick, the dumplings dense as a fist. By 1962, mince and tatties appeared on Scottish tables 4 nights a week. Today, the dumplings have been forgotten entirely. The dish is half what it was. Number 2. Boiled beef, carrots, and dumplings anchored the proper London tea on a Friday night, a dish so beloved that the music halls wrote songs about it. Housewives soaked a cheap salt beef brisket overnight, then simmered it for 3 hours with whole carrots, onions, and a bouquet of bay and peppercorns. In the last half hour, dough balls made from flour and suet were dropped into the bubbling pot, where they plumped and soaked the salty broth. The beef was carved thin at the table, the carrots came out sweet and dark, and the dumplings broke open like clouds. A jug of mustard sauce, sharp with English mustard, finished the plate. By 1956, boiled beef appeared on the tables of London cabbies, market traders, and bus drivers every Friday without fail. The leftover broth made Saturday's soup. The cold beef made Sunday's sandwiches. Today, the proper boiled beef supper has all but disappeared, replaced by ready-cooked salt beef from the deli. Number 1. Cawl, the Welsh working man's broth, sat at the top of every kitchen in the valleys for over 200 years. It was the supper that fueled the men who pulled coal from the deepest pits in Britain. Housewives filled a great iron pot with bacon hock, lamb scrag, leeks, swede, carrots, cabbage, and potatoes, simmered the lot slowly on the range for half a day, and served it in 2 courses. First, the broth in a deep bowl with hunks of crusty bread. Then the meat and vegetables on a great platter with a wedge of carefully cheese on the side. The smell defined the village. By 1955, Cawl appeared on tables across Wales 4 nights a week. The pot rarely emptied and was simply topped up with whatever the day brought. Miners ate 2 bowls before speaking. Children mashed the potatoes into the broth. Fathers spoke of Cawl with the same reverence other men reserved for chapel. When supermarkets arrived and ready meals took over, Cawl retreated to Sunday lunches and old grandmothers. The everyday working man's supper of Wales, the broth that built the coal fields, is now a ghost of itself. These 25 suppers fed the men who built modern Britain, and almost none of them survive in any meaningful way on a modern table. The independent butcher has closed. The dripping jar has gone. The earthenware pot has been replaced by a plastic tray and a microwave. But here is the thing. Every one of these dishes can still be made today, in any kitchen, with ingredients that cost less than a takeaway. Try one this week. Just one. The proper cottage pie with dripping mash, or the bacon ribs and peas pudding, or the cawl that built the coal fields. Then tell me in the comments which one you tried, and which working man in your family used to eat it. Because these suppers were never really about the food. They were about the men and the families who knew how to make something out of almost nothing, and called it tea.